Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining our program today. My name's Maddie. I'm a supervisor at the Crime Victims Compensation Program for the State Department of Labor and Industries. And we're here today to recognize two very important events. Most importantly, we want to acknowledge an event that celebrated nationwide National Crime Victim Rights Week. It's a week set aside to remember that victims have rights that should be respected and supported at every step of their recovery. But we're also here today to highlight the very important work of supporting these victims through this step. These victims have faced some serious crimes, and Governor Jay Inslee has marked this week with a proclamation which reads in part, whereas providing victims with knowledge of their rights and available services strengthens their ability to recover by restoring a sense of self-empowerment, and as trauma-informed response to victims promotes healing and fosters strength, and the state of Washington is dedicated to strengthening victims and survivors in the aftermath of crime, and building resilience in our communities, and working for justice for all victims. Now, therefore, I, Jay Inslee, Governor of the State of Washington, do hereby proclaim April 2nd through 8th, 2017 as Crime Victims' Rights Week, and encourage all people to join me in reaffirming our commitment to ensure all victims of crime know that they are respected and to create a victim service and criminal justice response that assists all victims of crime. Thank you, Governor Inslee. We have a full program today, so I'd like to welcome Randy Warwick, a Deputy Director with the Department of Labor and Industries, who will introduce our very special guests.
Does this podium make me look tall? I feel very tall. So thank you, Maddie, and thank you everyone for taking your time to come and out of your busy schedules to support victims and their families. I'd like to especially welcome the organizations that are coming to share information. So we have the tables in the back, and they have a plethora of information to be able to help and to share all the services that we provide. The information and awareness is going to be incredibly important for families. Not everybody knows about what's available to them, especially when they're in their time of need. So thank you again for everything you've done. I also wanted to take just a moment for a special recognition. So this year, so L&I every year gets to nominate a key leader for the 2017 Governor's Award for Leadership and Management. And the governor's going to make the decision in June. And I wanted to recognize L&I's Cletus. Nana, you have to come up here, Cletus. He's very surprised. We try to keep it on the down low. So Cletus is our Crime Victims Compensation Program Manager. He has 39 years as a public servant in the state of Washington. It's amazing, Cletus. 34 of those years are here in L&I. And he represents what we all want to be as a public servant. He leads with his heart. He's passionate about making that positive difference every single day. He never wavers from his passion. I am lucky to see it every day. He's caring. He creates a family environment on his team. It's really important because the work that this program does really gets to hear some really hard things that happen to individuals. And for them to take the time and create that family environment is just really a great gift. He stays connected with his customers. He's out in the community. He's educating. He's maintaining those relationships and trying to connect people to the services, even if it's not the service from L&I. For the last year, Cletus has been working on a really fun project. Just come a little closer. Right? And it's this customer-centric lean approach. And about a year and a half ago, I said, "Hey, Cletus, you want to try something?" He's like, "Sure." And he has done this fantastic work over the last year and focusing on customers' experience. He's always had the passion. If we just look at what the customer's experience is, are there things we could change to make it easier and better? And here's just a couple little stats, and then I'll let you sit down. But in this year and a half, for a claims decision, for a victim, they send a claim in, and they need to have some resolution relatively quickly. They have moved from about 21 days to 18 days. And every day and every moment counts on how quick a decision happens. For crime victims' medical bills, the gift that this program does, it takes care of the medical bills so the victims don't have to. Cletus has led a team that has reduced from 50 days of payment to 19. Another thing, a role that they do is they do collections, for instance, from restitution from offenders and from others, and they have increased their collections by 7%, and that's about $700,000 to help support the program to continued services. So Cletus, from all Washington citizens, if they were all here, they would be shaking your hand. But thank you for your dedication and your passion and your love for service. He doesn't get to say anything. He's very humble. So we hear all the time, I mean, we do see the news and you see some crimes, but really crimes are decreasing. But one victim in a serious crime is way too many. And the pain that happens to individual victims as well as their family is huge. One of the challenges we have is not everybody knows. Not everybody knows that we have this array of services to be able to help them. And a lot of people they go through their whole life without needing this kind of service, and it's that one moment that they need. So, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So the proclamation, that's what I was just thinking, thanks Maddie, talked about this Washington State. We have a lot of really strong core values, and one of it is dedicated to strengthening those survivors in overcoming those challenges. This ceremony marks the week of events nationwide, and I just love the theme of strength, resilience, and justice, because you need all of those to be able to move forward and get healthy. And it speaks to all the efforts, it all speaks to the efforts and dedications we have in support of victims and families. So we have a special guest today to talk more about supporting people who have suffered in the aftermath of some violent crime. First, Lady Trudy Inslee, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. So, one second, let me just do a little sentence. So over the years, she has focused her efforts on people of need and really on needs of women and children, and we really thank you for that. And she's really has an emphasis on the social services and organizations that help victims of sexual assault. And so thank you for taking your time today to spend to us and talk to us about some of your efforts.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you all. I have a broken toe, so I'm a little less than nimble. It's okay. Cletus, thank you for your work. I think that's a lean management style of leadership that you're doing, so thank you. And I might put in a good word to the governor for you. I don't know. And Randy, thank you for your work too. So I'm already learning things today, and I appreciate everything that all of you are doing who are here today, who work on this every day in your career. I know that the victims truly appreciate it, and you probably don't get thanked enough, so thank you. As we all know, crime can touch the lives of anyone, and even if you have not personally been touched by crime, you probably have been, but you don't know it. You probably know somebody, and they maybe haven't revealed that to you. So it's a great deal that we're here today to acknowledge the tens of thousands of people who are hurt or harmed every year in Washington. Providing these individuals and families with knowledge of their rights and services available in their community is the first step to recovery. On Monday, Jay read that, or proclaimed this Crime Victims' Rights Week, and we are taking this opportunity today and here and in other venues throughout the state to rededicate ourselves to ensuring that all Washingtonians have equal rights and access to the resources they need to find justice and healing. It's gratifying to see successful collaboration between our state agencies and their many community partners towards this important goal. I'm especially proud of our state's progressive leadership, right here, in addressing the often unseen victims of crime. Today, people you may know, as I said, friends, neighbors, coworkers, or even family members may be extremely fearful of reporting crimes. That is not a barrier to getting help in our state. As you'll hear and see today, many services and free services are available to anyone who has been hurt or harmed. And this is something I didn't know until I got these wonderful talking points, is that you don't have to identify as a victim or a survivor of a crime. Often a crime doesn't even have to be reported to seek help. So I think we need to spread the word on that. That's really valuable information. Strong communities are safe communities. The people in this room and their organizations throughout the state are committed to building resilience and working justice for all. I thank you, I congratulate you on your successes, and I stand with you in your ongoing efforts to serve vulnerable people in all of our communities. So keep going and keep those numbers coming down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Inslee, for those very kind and encouraging words. I'm going to take a little show of hands super quick. How many of you have heard the old saying, it takes a village to raise a child? How many of you have heard that? Great. That's great. That's good to hear. I truly think it takes a village to do anything well. Today, in the next part of our program, we're going to hear from Cletus Nanabu, my boss and the program manager of the Crime Victims Compensation Program, and he's going to tell you about the work that we do here at LNI. But we're also going to hear from the work of other state agencies who I consider part of our village and tell us about the work they do in supporting victims and their recovery. We're going to hear from Rick Torrance, the Managing Director of the Office of Crime Victims Advocacy for the Department of Commerce, and Steve Ekstrom, Manager of the Victim Services Program at the Department of Corrections, DOC, our neighbors right across the street. So, gentlemen, please.
I'm speechless, so to speak. This was a big surprise to me. But having said that, it's not about me. What my boss Randy described isn't what I've done, but the group of all the staff at Crime Victims Camp Program are the people that have made that a reality. So thank you, guys. Every year, millions of Americans are affected by crime. Many will need ongoing care and resources. In 2016, this program provided services to about 8,900 victims. We also paid sexual assault examinations for about 3,692 victims. Sadly enough, we also paid burial expenses for over 260 victims that were killed as a result of a crime. It's my daughter from Atlanta, so she's in college. I'm sorry, Mrs. Inslee.
Family comes first. Take the call.
And in 2016, we also paid out about $8.8 million for services such as medical, to include hospital stay, dental, mental health, burial expenses, prescription coverage, wage replacement, and sexual assault examinations. Even though crime victims is the payer of last resort, which means that the victim's primary insurance will have to pay up first before we pay that much money on behalf of the victims. It's also noteworthy to say that in 2016, children accounted for 30% of the claims we received, while women accounted for 57% of the claims we received. Moving on, in consultation with victims' advocacy groups and providers, we implemented a new management system which we believe will help us to be more effective and responsive to the needs of the victims. A week ago, we implemented a web-based portal for the county prosecutor's offices. This system gives them a quick access to our cost information as they prepare for restitution hearings. I'm happy to report that as of yesterday, we have 22 counties that have already registered to use these new resources. By the end of next month, we will launch an online application system that will provide victims the ability to apply for services online 24/7. It's not just applying for that, but it will give them an immediate claim number that they can then use to go seek treatment. And that ensures that we pay providers on a timely basis as well. So today we are celebrating the progress we've made, raise awareness of victims' rights and services, and stand with our families and neighbors, friends and colleagues whose lives have been forever altered by crime. Thank you. And I have the privilege of introducing Rick, who is the Director of Office of Crime Victims with the Department of Commerce.
I had mine on vibrate. Okay, put that right there. It'll probably vibrate the whole thing. Good afternoon. Okay. That was not planned, but I like the laughs. It's important to laugh. Good afternoon, and thank you, everybody. It's great to see so many people here today to acknowledge this very important idea of crime victim rights. And I'd like to thank the presenters for being here today and for the partnership that we share in addressing the needs of people that are impacted by crime and violence. I'm here today representing the Office of Crime Victims Advocacy. And as I think Maddie mentioned, we're located in the Department of Commerce. The mission of the Department of Commerce is to strengthen communities. We do that. We have over 100 programs at the Department of Commerce that touch almost every aspect of community and economic development. The Office of Crime Victims Advocacy is one of those program areas that provides a really vital role in strengthening communities. The vision of our team is we see a future where all people have access to support, healing, and the ability to reach their full potential, where all people experience autonomy, dignity, freedom of identity and expression, and safety in their homes and communities. And to that end, it's our mission to identify the opportunities and resources that are available to people impacted by crime, and to facilitate the availability of those opportunities and resources in communities statewide. We do this primarily through a few different ways, but primarily by granting to tribes, local governments, and community nonprofits. We actually manage, currently we have about 500 active grants with approximately 200 local governments, tribes, and local community agencies. We also advocate on behalf of victims to obtain the needed services and resources that they, so what that means essentially is when we see opportunities for those resources, we want to make sure that Washington State is taking full advantage of those. And we want to make sure that our legislature and our other leaders across the state know how important those resources are. We also assist communities in planning and implementing services for crime victims and advising local and state government agencies of the practices, policies, and priorities that impact crime victims. We have a table set up here today. My colleague Megan Basquette will be over there. I'll go sit with her. We'll show people how they can access those services and resources. And then I just want to sort of touch on a couple things here. We have a really broad scope of programs within OCVA, which include things like sexual assault services and prevention, domestic violence legal advocacy, victim witness assistance, crime victim service centers, which are really not sort of physical centers. They are they're regions which get together to try to address all of the needs of victims of crimes other than sexual assault and domestic violence, things like murder, drunk driving, child abuse and neglect, etc. We also manage a Prison Rape Elimination Act direct services and direct service line. And So on that note, I'd like to sort of segue into I want to highlight some of the partnerships that we have with other state agencies. So first of all, with the Prison Rape Elimination Act, we're very proud in Washington State to have worked very closely with the Department of Corrections on establishing, moving toward compliance with the Prison Rape Elimination Act. We also are now contracting with our community sexual assault programs to provide direct access or direct services to incarcerated victims. And as I mentioned, we have our office hosts a confidential toll-free line for incarcerated victims of sexual assault. We also work very closely, and we have a long history with the Department of Social and Health Services. Maureen Kelly is here today with them to provide domestic violence shelter services. And Maureen's boss, Susan Hannibal, also participates on our Victims of Crime Act Strategic Steering Committee, I'd also like to point out we've been working on a very important issue lately with labor industries on the availability of sexual assault nurse examiners. We also work with the Office of Civil Legal Aid to provide civil legal aid to victims. Work very closely with the Attorney General's office on human trafficking issues. And then finally with the Department of Health on prevention. So there's just a few of the examples. It's not an inclusive list, but we're very proud of those. And when we work together, we can do amazing things. So I would like to close by offering folks, if you see opportunities for more collaboration across agencies, please call me directly. Talk to the agencies. We really need to make sure that we are addressing all of those opportunities and taking advantage of those to work together. So I'll just close by saying thank you again.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Ekstrom. I'm the manager of the Victim Services Program at the Department of Corrections. Just give you a little overview of the services that we provide. We notify victims and other concerned parties when an offender is going to release from prison or be placed in a work release program, or if they escape. We also, in the process of notifying people about that, we solicit input about proposed release plans. give victims an opportunity to be heard in that process as well. We also have staff around the state that work directly with victims on safety planning. If there have been threats, if someone has experienced something that indicates that an inmate might pose a risk to them when that inmate is released, we can work directly with them. And this is where, in our program, a lot of collaboration occurs. We have 6 people that cover the whole state to do that, and they're located out in the communities that they work in. They become familiar with the resources, but we really rely on those local resources. We collaborate day in and day out with community-based programs, sexual assault centers, crime victim service centers, domestic violence programs, as well as criminal justice system-based agencies, in police agencies and prosecutors' offices. And we couldn't be effective without those relationships, without that collaboration. The other area that we've started doing some work a little bit more recently is working with victims who want to have a facilitated dialogue with the offender in their case. It's something we know is not for everybody, but for some folks it's important. They have questions that they never got answers to. They have questions about what happened. They have questions about why it happened. They have questions about, does the offender still pose a risk to them or to the community at large? And sometimes there's only one person that can answer those questions. And so we do a lot of screening. We work with OCVA in screening those cases where a victim has requested that. It can only be requested by the victim or the survivor. We don't allow offenders to request those meetings. And there's a lot of preparation that goes into doing that. So we don't do a lot of those, but when we do them, they're pretty impactful for both of the parties that are involved in those. We do have something that offenders can initiate along those lines that we recently instituted called an accountability letter bank. So if we have an offender in prison that wants to not only accept responsibility for what he did, but to communicate that to the victim, there's a way that they can do that by submitting a letter that we then place in a bank. We don't just shoot that out to the victim, but we also let victims know that they can request those, or that they can let us know if a letter is submitted in their case that they would like to be notified, and then they have the option of receiving it, and we can provide some support around that transfer of that case, of that letter. So, the Department of Corrections here in Washington has had a victim services program since the early 80s, and I think we were the first in the country that had a corrections-based victim services program. And that's, I think, something to be proud of, that the state stepped up to do that, and that the Department of Corrections went through the process of figuring it out without having a model or anything that they could copy or try to reinvent. I mean, it was out of whole cloth that this program was developed. And it's certainly evolved over the years. The technology that we use has changed, and the legislature has added responsibilities for us, all in the interest of providing services to victims. As I said, we can be proud of that, but unfortunately, this program, like many programs of its kind, is here because of a tragedy that happened. And in our case, it was a case up in Snohomish County where an inmate that was in work release, finishing a sentence for a sexual assault, went back to the home of his victim and murdered her and her young daughter and a neighbor. And it was one of those cases that really got the attention of policymakers here in Olympia and throughout the state to say we really need to do something to address this need. We need to keep people safe when they've come forward and reported a crime and testified in court, so that at least they know what's going on as that inmate progresses through the system. I think the other programs, I think LNI, the Crime Victim Comp program, evolved out of a similar situation with really awful case that came to the attention of policymakers way back in the 70s. And I don't know if we were the first CVC program, but we were one of the first. And OCVA, I think, the Office of Crime Victims Advocacy, was created as part of the Community Protection Act, which was, again, a response to a whole series of tragic events involving children and adults in this state that occurred in a short period of time. So, you know, we celebrate the fact that there are services now in place. I think it's important that we remember why those services are here and what we're trying to work to prevent, the kind of communities that we're trying to create, and that we work together. Programs in this state government are in a lot of different places, but there is also, I think, a culture of collaboration in this state that doesn't exist everywhere, and I feel proud to be part of that and hope that we can build on that and continue that. Thank you.
So thank you to Steve, Rick, and Cletus for letting you know a little bit about what we do as state agencies. But also, Rick and Steve mentioned many community-based services, a lot of which are here today. So after our program, please take a little bit of time to visit these resource tables and find out about the many services and programs that are available within state government and outside of state government. As I mentioned earlier, it does take a village, and we have a state government village, but without our community partners, we would not be able to offer the services as quickly and as meaningfully as we are today, including Rick and Steve's organization. So I just want to take a moment to say that. And now we're to a very special part of our program. The next two presenters will talk about the different perspectives facing victim advocates and victims and survivors themselves. Our first speaker will be Jonna Martin. She's a victim witness advocate with the Lewis County Prosecutor's Office. She's done tremendous work leading and supporting victims through the legal process, which can be daunting. And oftentimes, victims are going through this process, the whole legal process of going to court and perhaps facing their offender, at the same time as they're still trying to recover either from a physical injury or a mental health injury that was caused by a crime. So she's got some pretty big shoes to fill there in helping support a victim through that whole process. We'll also hear today from former state senator Jerry Costa. I have known her a long time and call her Jerry. And Jerry will talk to us about the challenges facing victims. Currently she works as a community corrections specialist for the Department of Corrections and DOC. But her and her family have been longtime advocates for crime victims and services. As a legislator, Jerry fought not only for victims' rights, but also to expand the services provided for victims. And in her work for nonprofit organizations, she continues her quest to help victims and their families and to keep the subject of victims' rights and services in the forefront of public policy. So please welcome Jonna and Jerry today.
Hello. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I've never actually done something like this before, so I'm a little nervous, and I apologize if it shows at all. But as Maddie had stated, my name is Jonna. I'm the Victim Witness Coordinator for the Lewis County Prosecutor's Office. I'm here to give you guys just kind of a brief overview of what the process looks like as far as working with victims of crimes. So it seems as though, as a lot of you already have knowledge in the criminal justice process, so I apologize if some of this information seems to be redundant. But, we receive information at the prosecutor's office that a crime's been committed. Once the report has been given to the prosecutor for ultimate charging decision, then the file is brought to me for victim notification. I attempt to make contact with the victim, check in with them, see how they're doing, try to start building that rapport, because ultimately that rapport that I've built with that person is going to assist in the prosecution of the case. We're hoping to ultimately keep that person on board so we can ultimately get a conviction, whether it's, if we're able to conduct a defense attorney interview, or, then we may be able to ultimately resolve the case prior to going to trial, which is obviously our ultimate goal. So, knowledge is very empowering, and I try to touch base with the victims that I deal with on a daily basis. I apologize. I don't try to make contact with them on a daily basis. That would be ideal, obviously, but I'm only one person, and we have quite a few cases. I deal with a lot of the felony cases, most of the felony cases in our office. We also have a tremendous amount of district court cases that have victims involved. We have juvenile cases. Thank goodness we do have a victim witness person who's also a paralegal that works in the juvenile department, so that lessens that caseload on myself. So I do try to touch base with victims on at least a weekly basis. That way, I can continue to build that rapport and ultimately, hopefully keep them on board. Sorry, and I'm starting to lose my train of thought here. Trying to reel back in. So through the process, I am a main point of contact for the victims. I will go through, I set up defense interviews, I set up meet and greets is what I like to call them. I don't like to call our initial interviews with our victims interviews necessarily to them. I try to lessen the legality portion of it and stuff. I want to make it hopefully as comfortable as I can, even though it's, not going to be comfortable by any means. So I do that. I assist victims with obtaining protection orders if needed, explaining a lot of the court process to them. I will assist them. There's been times where I've gone to divorce court with them, family court. So I just want to be a strong, supportive person for that person. I can only imagine what they've been through, and I don't want to make it any more difficult for them. So I've totally lost my train of thought, and I apologize. Yeah. I'm done. Sorry.
That was a nice job, John. In an instant, everything can change. I'd like you to just imagine, if you will, going about your day, doing what you normally do, and suddenly, out of nowhere, you feel yourself roughly shoved into a deep, dark space. In those first few seconds, expanding into moments that feel like hours and days, there is confusion, disorientation, trepidation. Fear slowly climbs up your spine and into your imagination. You don't know this place. You don't know how large or how confined this darkness is. You don't know if there is help inside or outside of this dark place. You don't know what to anticipate. You don't know which way to turn. You don't know how to regain control. As your eyes begin to adjust, you notice a small incision of light. You begin to move ever so cautiously toward that light, still unsure of your surroundings, still disoriented, still feeling that fear of the unknown. As you draw closer to that small opening of light, hope begins to mingle with the fear that is in your imagination. It sends comfort down your spine, and you feel yourself finally being able to take a big, deep breath. In late summer of 1976, my 14-year-old sister and the 13-year-old sister of my best friend were riding bikes together not far from our farm in what was then the very rural small town of Marysville. It's not rural or small anymore. They were abducted at gunpoint, taken to the woods, and brutally raped and battered over several hours. Gratefully, they both survived that experience. Eventually, he was caught. A plea bargain was given, and he was sentenced to prison for 2 concurrent 30-year terms. The parole board paroled him in 8 years and deported him to Canada. And a few years later, he raped again and ended up in the Canadian corrections and parole system. Because of this crime, our entire family was thrown suddenly into that dark abyss. There were not sexual assault support groups or services for victims in our area in 1976. Victims did not have the right to be informed of case status, to be treated with dignity and respect, to give a statement at sentencing. In fact, there was only one identified right for victims of crime in Washington laws in 1976, and as you've heard, that was the Crime Victims Compensation Program that had begun 3 years earlier. At that time, it didn't even pay for the sexual assault exam as it does now. Instead, my parents received the bill from the hospital for the evidence-gathering exam my sister was subjected to. The sliver of light that shone through the darkness for us came from a fledgling group of parents, family members, and friends of victims who had disappeared, been murdered, beaten, robbed, or sexually assaulted. Members of the organization, Families and Friends of Missing Persons and Violent Crime Victims, which is now Victim Support Services, had first begun meeting in 1975. They reached out to us, and we became members of an organization that no one wants to join. In the late 1970s and into the 80s, as the group began to coalesce into a more formal organization, much of the outreach and court support services for victims in Snohomish County were provided out of my parents' electrical contracting firm. My father, Buzz Costa, served as president of the organization for a few different times over the years, and both my mother and I also served on the board of directors at various times. From 1989 to 1993, I served as executive director of the group when we received our very first VOCA grant. After I moved to the other Washington to work at the National Victim Center, the organization had a couple of more executive directors, and then my mother, Bobby Costa, served in that capacity until her death in May of 2001. My sister has gone on to be a mother, a grandmother, a successful realtor, and although she still battles the anxiety of post-trauma on a regular basis, she is a woman who gives generously of her time and her resources. In fact, a percentage of every commission she makes selling real estate, she donates to victim organizations in Snohomish County. I'm extremely proud of her. I'm also proud of the work that victim advocates in our state and nationally have accomplished over the last 4 decades. And I'm really honored to be here today to commemorate National Victims' Rights Week. This year's theme, as we've heard, is strength, resilience, and justice. And it reflects a vision for the future in which all victims are strengthened by the response they receive, organizations are resilient in response to challenges, and communities can seek collective justice and healing. During this week that we remember the hard work of victims and victim advocates and allies that laid the groundwork for the rights and services available for victims today. Here are just some of those early highlights. Recall that the first time crime victims were even mentioned in Washington state statute was when the Crime Victims Compensation Program was implemented in 1973. In 1979, our state legislature passed the Victims of Sexual Assault Act and also provided some funding for the shelters for domestic violence victims. In 1981, we joined with a small group of advocates from prosecutors' offices to pass our state's Crime Victims' Bill of Rights, for the first time acknowledging that victims deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, the right to be notified and informed of their rights and case status, the right to be protected from intimidation, harassment, and harm, and the right to make a victim impact statement at sentencing. In that same year, our state legislature also terminated the Crime Victims Compensation Program by not funding it in the budget. We advocated at the legislature and in the media about the importance of this critical program for victims, and in 1982, the legislature created a new method of funding for the Crime Victims Compensation Program out of the Public Safety and Education account, reinstating this program that is the life ring of last resort for many victims. They also implemented a victim penalty assessment at that time to help fund comprehensive victim services at prosecutors' offices in our state. In this fourth decade of our work, I think it's really appropriate that we reflect on the many challenges and changes in the 1980s and 90s that laid the foundation for the rights and services available for victims today. So in 1981, President Ronald Reagan proclaimed the very first National Crime Victims' Rights Week. And in a 1982 Rose Garden ceremony, President Reagan appointed members to the Task Force on Victims of Crime, which held public hearings in 6 cities across the nation to focus attention on the needs of crime victims. The task force's final report offered 68 recommendations that became the framework for the advancement of new programs and policies. Its final recommendation to amend the Sixth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution to guarantee that the victim in every criminal prosecution shall have the right to be present and to be heard at all critical stages of judicial proceeding became a vital source of new energy to secure constitutional amendments for victims' rights in each state. In 1983, the Office for Victims of Crime, what we call OVC, was established by the U.S. Department of Justice within the Office of Justice Programs, and it was established to implement the recommendations from the President's Task Force on Victims of Crime. OVC established a national resource center, developed training for professionals, and developed model legislation to protect victims' rights. Also in 1983, U.S. Attorney General William French Smith established a task force on family violence, which held 6 public hearings across the United States, and he issued the first Attorney General guidelines for victim and witness assistance, outlining standards for federal victim and witness assistance and the implementation of victims' rights contained in the Federal Victim and Witness Protection Act of 1982. Here in Washington State, as you heard, 1983 brought the creation of the Department of Corrections Victim Witness Notification. And as Steve said, it was created in reaction to the horrific revenge murders of Renee and Shauna and Barbara. It wasn't until the enactment of the 1990 Community Protection Act that a similar notification program was created in the Department of Social and Health Services for victims and witnesses of juvenile offenders, sexually violent predators, and those committed to state mental hospitals. In 1984, on the national level, President Reagan signed the Justice Assistance Act, which established a financial assistance program for state and local government and funded 200 new victim service programs throughout the nation. That same year, the passage of Victims of Crime Act established the Crime Victims Fund. It was made up and continues to be made up of federal criminal fines, penalties, and bond forfeitures to support state victim compensation and local victim assistance programs. In its first fiscal year, 1985, the Crime Victims Fund deposited a total of $68 million. In fiscal year 2016, the Crime Victims Fund deposited $1.48 billion. These funds have helped to provide burial funds, lost wages, mental health counseling, and other vital victim support services throughout the nation and are the key to the expansion and professionalism of victim services since its inception. In 1989, 6 years after it was first recommended by the Task Force on Victims of Crime, voters in our state ratified an amendment to our state constitution, which you can find in Article 1, Section 35, and it gives victims constitutional rights to be informed, to be present, and to be heard at all critical stages of the criminal justice system. There have been many other gains, retreats, and restorations of victims' rights and services throughout the years. But I only have a few moments left to remind you about why these rights and services are so important. I think we all recognize that victims of crime are the injured party in a criminal act. Over the history of our country, we evolved from a system that required the victim to seek direct redress from an offender to a system that viewed crime as a breaking of a social contract with society at large. And so, punishments inflicted by the system should primarily serve to deter the criminal, to repay his or her debt to society, and to deter others from committing similar acts, thus leaving the victim entirely out of the process. Beginning in the 1970s, victims and our allies worked to bring balance back to the system by focusing on giving victims legal rights to be treated with dignity and respect, to be informed, again, to be present, and to be heard throughout the criminal justice processes, from beginning all the way through post-sentencing. Along with those rights, the focus was also to ensure that victims received services as early as possible to help them in reconstructing their lives. Victimization thrusts an individual into that dark abyss that I described earlier. They find themselves in a chaotic atmosphere for which they are unprepared. Regardless of the crime, victims may experience intense fear, helplessness, or horror, and may even develop post-traumatic stress symptoms that stay with them for many years. Many victims change their thoughts, their beliefs, and behaviors because of their experience. Victimization may alter their sense of freedom and influence the choices they make about where to live, where to travel, and what time of day they carry out their business, their social or recreational activities. Crime victims may become afraid of people who share the offender's characteristics, such as age, race, voice tone, clothing, body language, or distinctive features. Victims' behavior may change toward the people around them. For example, parents may be too confused and upset to pay attention to their children's needs. If one of their children was injured or killed, their other children may not receive the ongoing care and attention while their parent mourns. Husbands, wives, and partners may withdraw from the people that they love. Children who are nonviolent may begin acting out toward family, friends, and pets. Victims also differ in how they attempt to derive meaning from their experience. Some victims may express forgiveness toward the offender, using words like healing, closure, survivor, or recovery to describe their experience. Others have very strong negative reactions to these words and are angered by their experience. Most victims will feel a range of these emotions. The degree of threat to life and physical injury affects the risk of difficulty in coping. We know that 2 key post-victimization factors can increase the likelihood of victims developing mental health difficulties. One is lack of poor social support systems, which is why victim services are so vital from the first moment on. 2 is the degree of exposure to the criminal justice system. Many victims will describe their experience with the criminal justice system as even more traumatizing than the crime that they first experienced. We now know more about the short and long-term impacts of trauma. Scientists can now observe the human brain in action, and using brain scan technology, they've observed that trauma actually changes the structure and function of the brain. At the point where the frontal cortex, which is our emotional brain, and the brain stem, which is our survival brain, converge. It changes the brain, and they can see that. We also know through brain research that in the immediate aftermath of a traumatic event, the memory files of the brain are scattered and more difficult to access in any orderly fashion. A law enforcement officer who attended a training recently noted, and I quote, "I had a light bulb moment when the comparison between officer-involved shootings and sexual assault investigation interviews were made. We give our folks, law enforcement, 24 to 72 hours to settle before an interview. But we expect a sexual assault victim to rattle off specifics immediately and in order." As we interact with victims of crime in whatever capacity we encounter them, it is important to keep in mind that there are some common elements of emotional trauma. Crime is unexpected. The person is unprepared. There is nothing the person could do to prevent it from happening. Trauma changes the brain. It is not the event that determines whether something is traumatic to someone, but the individual's experience of the event. We cannot predict how a given person will react to a particular event. And while many crime victims achieve considerable reconstruction during the first year after the crime, there is no hard and fast rule for recovery. Every victim and their reconstruction process is unique. I want to thank each and every one of you for being willing to shine some light into that dark abyss, to let victims know there is light, there is hope, there is compassion, and that they are strong and resilient, and that together we will work to continue to improve justice for all. Thank you, each of you, for the work that you do each and every day.
Thank you, Jerry. I'd like to thank my staff for all they do for the victims and for organizing and making this event a reality. So I will ask my staff that are here to please stand up to be recognized. Thank you, guys. I'd also like to thank the representatives from Corrections and the Office of Crime Victim Advocacy, and a very special thanks to you, Jonah, Jerry, and Mrs. Inslee for your participation today. Thank you. Like Mrs. Inslee said earlier, if you know someone who has been a victim of a serious crime, let them know about some of the things you learned today. And please feel free to go to any of our agency's website to find out more about the services that we provide for the families and victims. Our collective effort and dedication provides so many victims with the resources they need to gain strength and resilience. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for everything you do on behalf of our victims.